I wanted to tell you about a new podcast from HRN. It's called Fed by Blue, and it explores the transformative power of water, showing how the ocean can serve as a sanctuary, a source of renewal, an important source of food, and a profound tool for the fight against nutritional injustice. I'm your host, Jennifer Bushman, Executive Director of Fed by Blue, a nonprofit working to highlight the role of responsibly sourced foods from water in the shaping of the future of our world's foods, and the executive producer of Impact for the James Beard and Emmy-nominated PBS docuseries Hope in the Water. In the show, I'll be sharing behind-the-scenes stories, personal reflections, and interviews with incredible people who bring this work to life. We'll also dive into the science, the psychology, and the magic of the water itself, and how it's playing an urgently needed role in the future of food, one wave at a time. Whether you're a longtime ocean lover or simply just curious about the life-changing potential of nature's most powerful source, this podcast is for you. So join me as we explore the stories of resilience, courage, and transformation, and discover just how much hope can be found in the water. Find Fed by Blue wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Braiden Albrecht. We'll talk to him about Mayacamas, Napa. We'll talk wine and more. We'll taste the Mayacamas. We'll taste actually a few Mayacamas for our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Straight out of Sonoma, Braiden Albrecht grew up around wine. His parents have been friends with his viticulturist since he was a kid. With a degree in viticulture or agro, whatever you told me before, from UC Berkeley and extensive travel to New Zealand and Australia, Braiden came back to California to dig in. He joined legendary and historic Mayacamas. What?
Mayacamas. Well,
Mayacamas.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and forth. Mayacamas vineyards in around 2013, becoming only their third winemaker in 2018, working for new owners, the Schottenstein family. Braiden is committed to tradition, the Mount Vita terroir, and a low-intervention approach to his farming and winemaking, and we'll get into that a lot more. Welcome to the Grape Nation, Braiden.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so fortunately for me, we're talking to Braiden in New York City. We're sitting down at his hotel across from each other, which is my favorite way to do it. What brings you to New York?
Oh, I mean, we get out to New York as often as we can. It's a great market for us. So we're out here doing a little market work and talking with people and sharing some of the spring release wines, the Chardonnay and the Merlot, and then starting to talk about our fall release wines and the Cabernets.
So, good time to be out to talk. Yeah. Also good time to leave behind the vineyard as far as whatever work has been done needs to be done.
Definitely. We're the vineyards are humming. We're just finishing up bloom, so having a good feel for what the 25 yields are looking like. It's been a great growing season out there so far. We finished up. Do
you have a feel for 25? Just at this point,
feels good. I mean, it's been an uneventful, kind of winter and spring. I mean, we had a lot of rain. We have close to 60. It was about 60 inches of rain, which for us is above average. That means we're 3 years where we've had close to average, above average rainfall, which is great. And no frost issues. No major problems during set. So all those things are fairly drama free, which I'll take.
All right, that's good news. as far as being in New York, you're not here for any specific event or a portfolio or whatever. Okay.
No, we'll come out for different events
right.
in the fall.
I'm sure you're invited.
Yeah, it's this time's just to hang out. So
cool. Thanks for taking the time to sit with us. All right, so Mayacamas Vineyards goes way back. I can't say that about every California winery I sit with, and it's a big part of Napa wine history. What I want you to do, because I'm sure going in while you're there and doing it, you have a good handle on their history. I don't want to spend the whole show on the history. I just want to give people an idea, about the history and how important it is, because I think Napa wines, predominantly Napa Cab, to most people, are not a way back thing to them. And you've earned that right. So tell me a little about the history. There's been minimal owners, minimal winemakers, which I've said.
Yeah. So kind of starting at the very beginning, the Fisher family, John Henry Fisher, founded the winery. Not as Mayacamas back then, but it was called John Henry Fisher and Sons. But in 1889, so the old kind of the headstone on our old stone wineries puts it at 1889. So 136 some odd years of continuous grape growing and winemaking up on top of Mount Veeder. So we're located up from Napa about 20 minutes from downtown Napa. Very top of Mount Veeder. The property's 465 acres. Let's see, its bottom of the winery is about 1,800 feet. The property goes up to about 2,600 feet. And so the Fishers, in the 1880s went by wagon up there, and it was probably, it's hard. It's a hard drive today. I always think about
still
forgetting the milk down.
They had to schlep barrels of wine down the hill, right? Yeah,
definitely. So it's certainly, it's always humbling to think about how they established that place. But the old winery was built with a lot of the volcanic stone from the property, and the Fishers their primary business was in San Francisco, pickle merchants and sword making allegedly also.
Wait, we have to stop for a second, because when you look at Napa now, there's all these people from all different professions, but a bunch of Silicon Valley guys and businesses. Here's a business guy that came and bought second property. He's like a mogul pickle maker. You don't hear that a lot. All right, so no. He makes his money from pickles, buys a property.
So he was kind of a Swiss immigrant, and so they started making wine kind of around the winery itself. So down around 1,800 feet, there was some vineyards planted, and there was a mixed use farm like many things in. At that time, and really throughout Napa's early history, there wasn't all this monoculture of just vineyards. They had a few other things. They were probably growing different things that they were pickling.
So when he bought the property, there were mature vineyards there.
No, my understanding is that there may have been a little bit, but he planted most of them. All right. And probably Zin or like kind of a mixed blacks, kind of sort of field blend. I'll say that the paperwork from that era is not super thorough. But so they own the property really through the 1906 earthquake. Most of his pickle business, et cetera, in San Francisco was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. And then it went into bankruptcy, and it was owned by a couple different families, a couple different Italian families and Swiss families throughout kind of the early 1900s through Prohibition, and then really kind of picking back up in the late 30s, early 40s. Jack and Mary Taylor bought the property in 1941, and they founded the brand Mayacamas. They came up with the label we still have today, and their first commercial vintage. It was really like 47, 48. We have one old bottle of the 48 Zinfandel. It's empty, but so that was kind of how they got started. And they're British, and the label, you can kind of see a little bit of sort of British crest almost in how the M's come together. Right. It's two mountain lions. So Mayacamas and Wapo, the Native American tribe from the area, it means well, at least one interpretation is Call of the Mountain Lion. So that was, and then the label has two lions coming together, allegedly kind of symbolizing Mary and Jack coming together to work on this project. And Jack was a kind of a petrochemical engineer, and but they both loved Burgundy. So planted Chardonnay originally. He got some cuttings from the Wenties, and planted some of our kind of first I would call kind of serious grapes, for at least compared to what we do now. Would have been some of those early plantings of Chardonnay.
Did they play the Pinot side of that?
They did. There was Pinot really up until the 2013 vintage. So I mean, not necessarily every year.
Tough to grow Pinot in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty diverse property in terms of microclimates and soil profiles. So
you could find a spot if you had to.
Right, there was places that worked for it. So we had, by the time I got there in 2013, there were 2 blocks of Pinot left, and we made that was I think my first day at the winery. We picked this block of Deer Hollow Pinot Noir, and then we didn't. Our destemmer was stuck in the port of Oakland, so we hand destemmed. I think we made about 25 cases of Pinot in 2013. That was the last finish. But yeah, they were obviously. I think they loved. It seemed like they loved Chardonnay, a little bit more than they liked Pinot.
Yeah.
But at least in how they planted, or they were looking to buy. Maybe they were buying Pinot from other places at the time. But they started making Pinot. The oldest I've had Pinot wise, I think it was like 60.
From the vineyard?
I think 69.
From the vineyard?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
How was it?
It was pretty fresh, yeah. I think there's a little bit more, as you go back in time with these wines. I mean, the oldest Chardonnay I've had from the property was 59. The oldest Cabernet was 62, and I think the oldest Pinot Noir was I think it was 68 or 69. I think like anything with older bottles, you have it's bottle to bottle. It's a lot more consistency on the Cabernet, the Chardonnays, but the Chardonnays and the Pinots can really age that long as well.
When they got there, did they kind of update and make some changes?
They did. They added our concrete fermentation room. We have these big open concrete vats that they added that building.
Is that a Travers decision, concrete vats?
So that was actually a Taylor decision. So they added that, they built that fermentation on in the 50s.
So the Taylors put the concrete.
Yeah, exactly. And then
now there weren't a ton of wineries around. There were some, but was concrete sort of counter to what people were thinking and doing, or?
There's definitely other anecdotes from the era that would say there was a few other concrete tanks like that. They were pretty simple. I mean, they're not concrete. I kind of say now concrete's in vogue, and the concrete tanks we have are a lot more kind of calibrated. These are basically cinder blocks with epoxy, line. So it's not they're not super porous, but they're open top concrete fermenters. So that's why I like to use the term vat. It's not like a tank, and not a nice non-blot or Sonoma cast stone.
So you had people that were interested in wine and making it, running the place. How long do they hang on? So when and why do they bail?
Yeah, so they owned the property until they sold it to Bob Travers in 1968, and I think there was a couple kind of key moments. I mean, it was certainly tough sledding for the Taylors. At least, they wrote a bunch of really great newsletters, and usually like 2 a year. And so I love going back and reading. We have all these different.
Is it a wine newsletter or just generally about the area?
It's mostly about the wines that they're making, and what's going on property. So there's a really cool written history.
For you, it's awesome to get your hands on, right?
Yeah, there's definitely there's days where I'll go back and read different newsletters from the 60s or 70s, and that's something that Bob continued to do. But the Taylors definitely, I think wine sales in the 60s were solid, but Jack had to go back to work. I think I always forget if he worked for Shell or BP, but went back into the petroleum industry. And there's a couple funny stories from that time, but basically my favorite is Bob Sessions, who obviously went on to be the winemaker at Hansel for a long, long time.
Right.
He started in 1965 there, and I think that to me is kind of the key in kind of formulating the style that we see now. Was these mid 60s kind of fine tuning of the winemaking practices through Bob
stop
Sessions.
There for a second. So the 60s you're kind of citing as really the beginning. of the style that is the style then-ish into now.
Yeah.
That was kind of the birth of it. That was, did you say Sessions was involved with that? They brought him in?
Yeah, so the Taylors had Sessions. Brought in Sessions, and there's a funny interview that I read with Bob where he said he came in to learn more about wine, but was not a winemaker by trade. Was I think he was in finance. I know Bob Travers was also in finance. But he said the story was like there was no winemaker in the 1965 vintage, so we kind of just did it basically. So it started like in a very humble way. It's not like the Napa of now where things are well defined and there's these roles and
the difference is crazy.
Yeah, totally.
But from what
yeah.
Tracking the history, reading and all that, in the late 60s, I mean, how many wineries were, established or big enough or even was it a handful?
Yeah, it was definitely, you'd think under 20 that were serious about it, or at least that were making
dozen,
kind of fine
20s,
wines.
Yeah, which is crazy compared to
it was definitely, early days, and
right.
there was, I think that was, pretty exciting. It would have been cool to have seen Napa in that light, I think, because I think there was, especially tasting the wines from that era, especially the ones that have survived, some of them are incredible. And to think back to, what we do now, how much we like to know about all the different layers of our
especially
process.
Your history and, how you make wine. It's, it's very steeped in history.
Definitely.
Right, so get me from Taylor to Travers to current.
Yeah. So Taylor's, they sold in 68 to Bob Travers, and then Sessions kind of was in that transition period. He left, I think, in 71. So Bob Travers, and Sessions were overlapped for a few years. And then, Bob Travers and Bob and Noni, they were, I think in their early 30s when they bought the property and, made the wines.
So Bob thought working with Sessions, he was able to learn and get a feel going forward.
Yeah, I would assume so. I've actually never asked Bob that question. But I know Bob Sessions' son, and I've talked to, a few people. So I think that they worked pretty well together, and I'm sure there was some transfer of information. Right. And I think if I try the kind of those late 60s, early 70s cabs, there's definitely a lot of continuity between those. So I would think that they would have learned a lot from each other. And
so Travers settled in, made the wines. The wines in his era, were they defining the style? They were good wines.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I guess I'd be remiss not talking about the Paris tasting. So
that was under Travers'
right.
ownership.
70,
let's talk about
cab.
it. This is the 76?
76
Steven
Paris.
Spurrier Paris versus sort of U.S. tasting.
Yeah, definitely. So the 76 tasting, it's funny to talk to Bob Travers and other producers who submitted wines at the time, for it. They didn't really. It became such a huge thing. But when Spurrier asked for the wines, it wasn't like they really knew what they were getting. Right. Someone else wants to try the wine, cool. But they didn't know it was going to be this monumental event. So they were looking for. There's a couple Mayacamas kind of nuggets in there where Spurrier, one of the reasons he even thought to do it, this is a story I heard from Gene Arnold Sessions, was trying the 68 late harvest Zinfandel. He was really blown away by that. And obviously the core of the tasting ended up being focused around Chardonnay and Cabernet, but the 68 late harvest Zin apparently was one of the inspirations for it. So they wanted the 1970 Cabernet from us, which I guess was sold out. So he got the 71, which Bob Travers, when we've talked about it, was like, it was pretty tight. Like it wasn't quite released yet, or it just would have been barely released. And he's like, I had a little H2S, but I figured it'd be fine. in Bob's tone, it was, then as the tasting happened, I think we did 71 cab. I think it was like 10th. It didn't score in the top 5 or anything like that.
Did you have one wine in there? Or?
I think we just had one. I don't know.
I think it was 7th.
It was 7th? Okay, gotcha.
I think in my research, and it was as good as 7th.
And it's gotten better when they've done the, the different Paris, redos. I think I remember getting a call from Warren Winiarski, left a voicemail on my phone. I was out in the vineyard, and it was, I think, the 40th anniversary, and the 71 cab got 2nd place. And so it hasn't moved a lot. The wine is still pretty steady. So I think, the wines of that era, kind of to your original question, are excellent. I still think of the run of vintages from 68 to 80. When you sit down and try those, there's really not a lot of slouches in there. They're all
that 74 Heights is legendary. Yeah. Was 74 great for everybody in the valley? I mean,
as far as I know, every
74 is probably a damn good wine.
It is very good.
Yeah,
I've had the Heights 74. I've had the Mayacamas 74 a few times, and they're really, really good.
Yeah.
68, 70, 71, 74. 75, 78, and then good the things that are kind of around it are just as good. They're just not quite as good.
Right. So you kind of go into that thing, not knowing what's going on, coming out. When maybe the results or a little news or people wrote up about it. Was there any kind of recognition or push from that, or it was kind of quiet?
I mean, it seemed like it probably gained more steam later,
but not immediate.
Not immediately, and I think we have a plaque, that from, I think this is the state of California, kind of honoring the wines.
Nice.
In there, so I think there was certainly probably a lift from the news of the event, and how well the California wines had done. But I don't know if it was, overnight sellout of those wines per se, but it certainly was positive.
Transmitting information wasn't as easy those days. You did something and you were in a vacuum. Now it's ridiculous how quick it. We'll talk about that.
Viral would mean something quite different back then.
Yeah. All right. So Travers hangs on how long and turns it over to the Schottensteins. When and why?
So he sold it to the Schottensteins in 2013. So a pretty big run from 68 to 2013. Incredible legacy of winemaking, and I think he was ready. He was ready to retire, and seemed very much at peace with it. We still stay in contact. He comes up to the winery to check in and spend time. So it wasn't like he really wanted to get out, and on negative terms was just ready.
He's still a cheerleader.
Yeah, definitely. I called him the other week because a friend of mine was looking to really fix a label on a 6-liter that had fallen off. And I was like, Bob, what sort of glue did you guys use? He's like, I have no idea. I don't know.
Wow, he's getting that nerdy, huh?
Yeah.
Like, don't use this, try that. He was hoping to get, something with alcohol in it,
Yeah,
but he didn't have the answer.
It was an old label. An old label. So I was trying to do some digging for him. But that's how close Bob and I, we still stay in contact on that. And so it's been really fun to learn a little bit from Bob, but we kind of joked that he largely dropped his pen on his desk when the wire transfer went through, and he kind of took a step back. So it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of transition while he was there for a little bit. In the property sold in May of 23.
For the new people, it was easier.
May of 13, and he was gone by harvest.
For the new, a lot of times you just want to get going forward and forget about that. Now, I'm just curious because I don't remember the transaction. Was that sort of private? Did he put it up for sale? Was there buzz in the market? I mean, how did the Schottensteins get to it?
Yeah, so
why didn't Constellation or Gallo buy it?
My understanding of it is that it was that was kind of. He was open to selling it for a little bit longer than that. I know of a few other people who had said, "Oh, I went and looked at it," and then the Schottensteins through who was the partner at the time was Charles Banks, and Charles.
Was he also Vineyard 29, Charles Banks?
So Charles was Screaming Eagle with Cronky, and then a number of other wine businesses, and I don't know exactly how Charles heard about it,
So Charles was kind of the first guy that got wind of it?
I think so, yeah. So
right.
Charles and then...
Were Charles and Schottenstein friends?
Yeah, and I think Charles, was, brought up to them and said that I think this would be a great opportunity. Joey Schottenstein was really familiar with the kind of legendary vintages, especially the 60s and 70s wines from the Mayacamas, and his palate certainly is more, it's not necessarily old world per se, but loves the classics. So was familiar with the brand,
right.
but hadn't been up to see to see the dirt, so to speak. And so they kind of worked through what that would mean, what it would look like, and then in May of 2013 they partnered on it. And Charles, he exited the business in 2017, so the Schottensteins own it out right now.
3-4 years. He had some issues.
Yeah.
They kind of separated. Schottensteins then and now are the sole owners. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right before
and
the
you
fires
came in right at that transition, right? In 2013 was the transition?
Yeah, so I came in really on
So let's talk about you.
Yeah,
so we're current. I want to hear about, your journey. Let's go backwards for a second. You studied agriculture at Berkeley. You grew up in Sonoma. Your family, were they in wine or around it?
Yeah, so on my mom's side of the family, I'm fifth generation grape grower in Napa. So my mom grew up on a Cabernet vineyard in Rutherford. My grandpa
basically grew to sell.
Yeah, they were.
Did they ever make wine?
No, they sold on a handshake deal to.
So Rutherford's
to
terrific vineyards and grapes, so obviously sought after, right?
Definitely. It's right on the corner of Manley Lane and Highway 29.
Okay.
So it was an old yellow farmhouse with a water tower. And
did you physically?
I didn't physically grow up there, but I was there a lot.
So that was separate from where the residence was.
So my grandfather, my mom grew up on that property.
She did.
My grandfather, until he passed away, lived there. And they had a great pool. So we would go over there. We go over there a lot. We were there over there most of the summers. Sonoma to Rutherford's probably a 40-minute drive.
Right.
So we were there quite a bit.
Was your dad in the biz?
No. He grew up in San Francisco, and he's in the. He works for Pete's Coffee now. He's been in the food industry, but not in wine. Though he loves wine.
Right.
But my mom's side's really where the wine is.
At some point, Kotori will come up, but was your mom using him in those days?
No,
or they were just friends.
Because we were just, the family vineyard was just farmed in house by my grandpa, and then eventually my uncle, and they'd have some help for sure, but they were, they didn't have a vineyard manager, at least in that sense. So Phil really came in through. Just growing up in Sonoma,
right.
And just through, growing up with his kids, really.
Good move, familiar with him.
Definitely. I grew up playing soccer with his youngest son, Max, and then Max's older brother, Sam, was our coach at different times.
That's funny.
And then really skiing kind of brought us all together. So they both were in the Mighty Might program up at what's now Palisade, and I'm a big skier. So we'd always go up and ski together. And
where'd you go to ski?
It was called Squaw Valley. Now it's called Palisade, which is like basically alpine and
that's what
alpine and Squaw.
Sam, now has his own wines too, Kotori, and Phil is very much in the business. All right, so because of all of this, are you sort of caught up and intrigued that you want to pursue your studies in agriculture? Yeah. It's obvious that's why you study that in Berkeley.
Yeah, definitely. I knew. Yeah, I think like so many people who grow up in wine country, you understand it's beautiful. You don't necessarily, it's also a small town, and you want to get out and see the rest of the world. And but I remember distinctly driving. Actually, it was down Madrone Road in Sonoma, and I was probably 17 or 18, and it was just kind of just hit me about how beautiful this place was. And from the. For what you're starting to think about what you want to do professionally, and you really start to think about, how do I if I wanted to be back here, how would I do that? What would be my reason why? And
so the first thing is studies.
So certainly, I think I also really wanted to try and figure out a way to make where I grew up better. So the environmental.
So you always
part
had
of it
a plan to come back.
Yeah,
but was it after school that you started really traveling and far? Not Burgundy or Oregon, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did a lot of work for Phil in college. So I'd come back in the summers, and he's really Phil. I got into winemaking really because of viticulture and because of growing organically. Phil's as soon as I thought, okay, wine would be great.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
let's stay with you.
But that was the inspiration,
right? Which will tie in, and it's important for what the winery is.
Totally. But
why do you choose to go? To like what was it, New Zealand and Australia? What was there that?
Right. So I mean, actually, right after college, I had there was the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So one of my professors called me and said, you need to go work on this project before you get into wine, because I was about to go work harvest, and I had an opportunity to work in kind of some of the evaluation of the damages for that spill. Which was
it more to understand and absorb and be exposed to like new knowledge and
exactly
right.
So we did some really, really cool work on that, and it was funny because the company I was working for, they asked me to put the wines together for their holiday party, and I had way more fun doing that than I did kind of the economic
that
work
was a
of that.
Telltale sign, right?
Like, maybe I should have. I should go back. So basically, I had turned down a few vintage winemaking opportunities to do work on the oil spill, and then. Two of my best friends were going to go work harvest down in New Zealand, and I thought, okay, well, that seems like a good way to kind of get back in that sort of production mindset. So I went down.
So it was a little more friends were doing it than a deep understanding or admiration of that region and all. I mean, that was all good, but
definitely,
you kind of wound up there, which wasn't bad when you look back.
No, and a good friend of mine, Drew Pickering. So Drew is the associate winemaker down at Honada and the Hilt down in Santa Barbara, and during college, he was working there, and I had kind of gotten a chance to talk to him and see what his work was like, and so he's always a mentor, and he had worked a harvest in New Zealand, so I reached out to him and said, hey, would this be valuable, in the direction I want to go, and he said absolutely, and it's not a bad place to spend some time either. So it was kind of. I had a great time in New Zealand. Met a bunch of people I'm still close with in Napa now.
Were you working on all aspects, farming and cellar? Did it lean towards one thing more than the other?
Much more cellar. More cellar.
Really?
That
I thought you were going
to
say the opposite.
No, I mean, I think that was, I had a good viticulture background at that point, so I wanted to dive a little bit more into the cellar and get some practices down and that was really, I felt like something I needed to get a feel for a little bit more directly. So I had done some cellar experience during college, but not harvest in an intense way like that. So I went down there and traveled a bunch, and then.
What year did you leave there to come? Did you come back there to here?
That was harvest of 2012.
Okay, so close to.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go. You come back from you leave the harvest of 2012. Is it New Zealand?
In New Zealand, and
did you have something hooked up by then?
Yeah. So another passion of mine is mountaineering, and a friend of mine from Sonoma started a mountaineering company in the Indian Himalayas. This is kind of a tangent here.
Is it touring or equipment or what?
Yeah, exactly. Mountain climbing, backpacking, eventually motorcycle treks and stuff like that. So I was helping them doing some route finding there. So after the harvest of 12, I went to spent the summer in the Himalayas, and then came back and went the next spring to worked harvest in Australia, and then went back to India for another summer, and then Phil called me and said, you need you should come back
So Phil was the connector, the instigator.
Yeah.
And this is somewhere 2012, 13?
2013, I was reaching out to Phil. We were kind of talking about me coming back to work for Enterprise Vineyards, which is his vineyard management company. And he said there was a place that he thought would be a good fit for me. He couldn't really tell me, as I don't think the ink was dry on the deal yet. So I kind of knew something was up. And so I went back and
did it happen quickly?
It happened. I think I got back, and it must have been 2 weeks later. I was at Mayacamas, and that was
man. That's good story, good fortune, good timing, good luck. All karma and everything. All right.
Yeah.
So we're now at the beginnings of Mayacamas. All right. I want to talk about how Mayacamas has always been known for its style of Cabernet, bucking the trends. But I think now's a good time before we get into finishing my point. In front of us, we have a Chardonnay, which is one of the smaller handfuls of types of wines and varietals that you make. So tell me what we're drinking. Tell me a little about the Chard program. Don't tell me, just do more descriptive, and because a little later on we'll talk about cellar practices,
right.
vineyard and all.
So this is the 2023 Chardonnay. So this was released in this past spring.
Talk about the vintage.
23 is a great vintage. Really top to bottom. It was a little bit later ripening Chardonnays. Usually we'll say in a warmer year we'll start middle of August. This was the first pick. It was the first week of September. Really long hang time. Not a lot of rain or heat pressure to kind of dictate harvest in uninterrupted terms. So really happy with the 23.
What made it longer? Because it wasn't there wasn't a lot of heat, or just natural progression.
Yeah, it was.
The heat didn't spike it.
Right. Yeah, you had time to kind of let it was just a little bit cooler, slower sugar accumulation, slower phenolic development. But really ideal. Really cool way to carve up the property and do a lot of really nuanced harvest kind of picks, and that really, I think, to me, shows a lot in the 23s. So with the cooler vintage, plenty of acidity, and that's really the backbone for all of our wines, but in particular Chardonnays. We're going to pick the grapes pretty early to retain that freshness. I think distinctively in glass, it's minimal in probably a couple things. It doesn't go through malolactic fermentation.
So let's talk about the wine itself. No mallow.
No mallow.
Okay.
And then also fairly minimal new oak use. Which
that's kind of a prevailing story.
Definitely.
The winery, right?
Definitely it is. Yeah, we have in a big vintage, it might be 10% new.
You know what I didn't notice, yay or nay? Is there any stainless steel in the Chard?
So the stainless will be involved in
early
just the
on?
front end of, we'll press to stainless steel, settle for
More
24
of a
hours.
holding vessel.
Yeah, in certain vintages there can be, we'll have stainless steel drums that we might do fermentations in, and there can be stainless steel, like a stainless steel tank ferment, because we've run out of space in barrels or something like that.
Situational.
But it's usually it plays a role, but not an aging role typically.
All right, so let's do a quick evaluation. So it's got terrific color, Chard color, kind of a straw, not light, not a deep yellow or whatever. On the nose, this is your wheelhouse. What are we getting on the nose?
I think it's definitely bright citrus right now. Is
that typical? Is that a prevailing thread? I know vintage differs.
Citrus citrus usually has a role. Sometimes it's in a warmer year, it might kind of be more, more like kind of lemon custardy,
right?
But it can have a richness to it. But in a cooler year, it's much more kind of lemon rind almost.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe like almost not quite like super ripe Meyer lemon. There's a sweetness to it, but it's still pretty dry and mineral.
That's a good description, because Meyer lemon's a little less sour.
Right, but
but you're not getting that even mild pucker.
No,
but you're picking up the lemon. The mouthfeel is nice.
Yeah, it's got great length.
It's got great length. It's kind of a medium, and it's not thin. It's not like California unctuous, creamy or whatever. No mallow.
And the phenolics to me are pretty striking. That's one of the things about this style when you're in that vintage, it has like almost a touch of tannin. It feels like, and I think that really is where the site really shows.
Good food wine, good acidity. The tannin gives it body. Does do the palate descriptors replicate the nose? The citrus, does anything else introduce to you on the palate?
I mean, I think you get. I don't know if I quite get like the mineral and the aromatics as much as I get on the palate. There's a lot more. There's a salinity on little that I think is pretty pretty striking.
That. I like that.
And you can kind of like you can dance around it on the aromatics and like maybe a little oyster shell, but I think it really ties in aromatically and palate and that. But that palate salinity is pretty striking.
It's a beautiful wine. So that's the 23, which is in the market now.
In the market now, yeah.
Mayacamas Chardonnay. It's not designated on the label because it's in the cooler. It's just, the Mayacamas Chardonnay, right? Or is it a vineyard? It's Mount Veeder, Napa Valley, Mayacamas Chardonnay.
Yeah, we do some smaller bottlings of Chardonnay as well. But this
always or when it makes sense?
When it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, we have
which also with the cabs too, right? Which
the special bottling. So the 23 we also have we did a special bottling out of the 23 Chardonnays, but this is the core.
All right, so we tasted the Chard. I don't want to say we got that out of the way, but I mean, let's talk about the, cab. So what I was saying is, the winery bucks most trends on the cab. And it's kind of obvious what they are, but define the style for me. It's a style that's been there. You walked into, you've continued to work with, may have, done your own thing. What is that style?
Well, I think we often call it kind of classic Napa.
Does that?
It's just kind of a weird way to say.
Restrained?
Yeah, I would say restrained.
No, but I don't mean to dick around or whatever. Maybe you're being coy, but we know, not much later the cabs to be very big. The classic is a more.
I think of it as more of a moment in time. So like when I say classic, I think of. The Cabernets that were being produced kind of at the kind of the dawn of the Cabernet era in Napa, which I kind of view as, the 60s and 70s. Right. So rooted in that side, which I think would have been more Bordeaux influenced, probably more restrained, more arguably more red fruited with more acid and kind of grittier tannins. I think that's kind of how I would describe, or when I think of classic, that's kind of what I think. I mean, obviously, it depends on how long you've been in the Cabernet game. In Napa Classic, if you started in the 90s, might mean something different. But yeah, that's I think of rooted in that early kind of early Cabernet vintages at Mayacamas, and that's something that I think is that we try to stay pretty true to.
Right. I mean, you're an example, and there are others that are the opposite that kind of stuck to their compass. This is, because let's talk about, the elephant in the room. Parker comes on the scene and he has a certain style and he sways literally how people make wine for ratings and all of that. Mm-hmm. Do you think too many people, a good chunk in the valley, let's stay with Napa, cling to that style or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different producers who, everyone does something a little different for their space and their market. I think there's, it always is fascinating for working for an old school spot that, when the pendulum has shifted kind of away from Parker and we've kind of our styles come back into vogue,
right?
And it's been
without trying,
which was great. Yeah. We were it was a good fortune.
So there's definitely been a shift. I mean, yeah. I'm answering the question I asked you to answer, but a lot of people are still clinging on, but there's definitely, some movement. You're seeing both.
Definitely, especially amongst my peers. I think, it's not always overnight. I think, sometimes these changes are gradual and it depends on.
Do you think it could be a generational thing, like younger guys, whether it's you, who wasn't in a family business and took over, but came in young? do you think even though the family vineyard was making it, they may look at it, let's try some different style here or tweak?
Yeah, I think you could. I think there's probably more opportunity now to pivot brands, or start new brands in this style. Maybe not this élevage from a cash perspective.
Right.
So as we age for our wines, our Cabernets will be in barrel for 30 months, and then 5 years to market.
A handful of people do that, but
right. But that's a tough proposition when you're starting. I think, especially with the Cabernet cost structure in Napa. But so I think we're lucky to have that. But I think there's definitely more. I think there's more restraint in the Valley on Cabernet production than there has been for some time. But there's still plenty of rich, opulent cabs there. And I think what's cool is that both can be made incredibly well, and depending on the site, can really speak to what that producer is trying to execute. So I try not to think about it in positive or negative terms per se.
There are terrific examples of both.
Yeah,
I agree. And stylistically, you pick what you like.
Exactly.
That came. Some guys did well with it. They still do well. God bless them. Yeah. Am I wrong about this? I've been doing the podcast 8-9 years, and I've kind of leaned heavily in through the years into thoughtful farming, thoughtful winemaking. Label it however you want.
Sure.
Low intervention, natural, organic, biodynamic. I mean, that stuff is important to me. I always sensed that Napa wasn't doing the best job doing it from way back. Because even in Europe, there was that whole industrial pesticide revolution. They got out of it. Are you seeing, is it what we said before, younger people, generation? Are you seeing a shift? Is it happening? Is it quick enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's definitely happening. I think it's happening pretty fast. Quick, it is. I wish it would happen faster.
Right.
But everyone's got their constraints. I mean, I think there's probably more producers that are farming organically than you even know.
Right. That don't certify, but
exactly.
practice.
That don't use it for marketing, because I think organic wine still has kind of like a not. There's places that don't need any extra dressing around their branding, So we talk about it a lot, but it doesn't say it on our label or anything, like grown with organic grapes. And so I'd say there's a lot more producers that are doing that than you might know. But
so
I think
that point is more than you know. My question was, enough, and is there a shift?
There's definitely a shift. I think Napa Green, that which is kind of pushing sustainability without, at least now without Roundup. There's definitely a big shift, for call it for families like my family in Rutherford, who me talking to my grandfather about farming organically, he probably would have told me to leave. You know? You don't know what you're talking about, right? Yeah, like yeah, kid.
Yeah.
But our ranch has shifted to organic, probably certified. I don't know, at least a couple of years ago, certified. So that's even the old guard is shifting. And I think what I think about a lot is there are certain crops that are pretty that it's not cost effective to farm organically, or it's a lot more challenging, and you have to charge a much bigger premium to make up for that to make the business make sense.
Well, everything, exposure, weather, humidity, rain.
Right. We have a pretty easy
dictate how
tough it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so, in Napa, in Mediterranean climate, like it's not a terribly expensive or challenging shift.
You're not hit hard with decisions and all that.
And I think, wineries, especially if you're thinking about Napa, like most of the vineyards are growers. They're not making wine. I mean, there's plenty of wineries that are, but there's a lot of growers.
I love hearing that. And, one of the trends on the podcast is, and some people are even getting tired of it, that the best wines are made in the vineyard. Mm-hmm. Well, of course. I mean, you're starting there. But that leads me to the next thing. Are people doing a decent job in the vineyard, or like we just discussed, moving towards better practices, may even be organic, but don't necessarily need to, toot about it, but screwing it up in the cellar? Or is there more of that going on than you want, or it usually goes hand in hand because it's a mindset?
Oh, I think it's I think the connection between vineyard and winery, I think, is probably greater than it's ever been. And that's
so
also.
So if you're doing it this way, you're probably following it. You're not going through that pain to add whatever that crap called megaperm, right?
Yeah, and I think you see that both if you're running an estate program, like we are, where I can. I'm the director of both sides of it. I have to see the fruit come in and then work with it. Or if you're buying fruit from a grower, there's a lot more hands-on winemakers who are out in the vineyard working with their growers, working with the farming side to make sure we're getting the fruit quality we want to see coming through the door of the cellar. So it's I think it feels like anyways, more. There's more it's more connected, not siloed now than it has been.
It should be, and I hope that it is.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, that was really important. And my understanding of winemaking was obviously really rooted in vineyards first. As I think, if you have,
we discussed, firmly. What about varietals? I mean, obviously, you think of Bordeaux. I mean, it's the Bordeaux varietals. You think of Napa Valley. You think Cab first, and then there's been a decent amount of Chardonnay. You guys actually had more Chardonnay planted than Cab and switched it around.
Yeah.
Are you doing a little, I don't know if experimentation, but are you doing a little, like I see you have a Grenache Rosé. Was Grenache on the property forever or you put it in? And secondly, do you see like your friends or other places experimenting with varietals and lots and all that? I mean, my friend Dan Petrosky, all he's growing is Italian white.
Right. No, Dan has had tremendous success with that, and I love his wine. So it's obviously there's an appetite for more than just Cabernet or more than just Chardonnay in the valley,
and an opportunity where it could work. Right.
Definitely.
You agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's it's still tough sledding, and it's not going to happen overnight. But we have a little bit of Grenache planted for our rosé program.
That's my question, where you get into other varietals. Why Grenache? Was that a love of somebody? Was that the perfect match? When you said, I want to make a rosé, it's either Pinot, Grenache. How'd you get there?
Well, I think
you have to grow it too.
You have to grow it. I think for me, the rosé program, talking back to those old newsletters that Mary Taylor wrote, the rosé program, there was a legacy of rosés at Mayacamas over the years with Cabernet rosés, Zin rosés, Pinot rosés.
That's where those newsletters really help.
Oh yeah. I'm like, oh nice, they made a Cab rosé. So
you don't see that a lot.
No. So in 2018, we didn't have a rosé, and I think starting in the 2018 vintage, we said, okay, like it would be really fun to make a rosé just because they're. It's a great summer wine. I really think that there's great rosés out there. What if we had to do something? What are the great rosés that we like to drink? And you kind of go to the south of France, and obviously Tempier. That's not a Grenache. That's not 100% Grenache actually. Right. I think it's mostly Mourvedre.
But the region and all that.
So thinking about about from a clonal perspective, kind of going more. Going more Rhone, Rhone, Southern France centric, was kind of the direction I wanted to go with it.
And Grenache grows well on that property on Mount Veeder.
Yeah, so it's doing well. Yeah, and so Phil is a big Rhone.
Right.
And Grenache in particular, aficionado.
Yeah. So, Grenache is one of the great grapes in the world. Probably.
Totally. So we have a fun little block that's actually more of a GSM, but it's about 85. I think it's about 85% planted to Grenache, and then with a little bit of Mourvedre and Syrah in there. But that was I think, to the bigger question about, experimentation, we have a little bit of, I think it's 0.1 acres now of Aligote. So again, kind of, we're not changing. It's not a monumental shift, but thinking about
what happens with it,
and see about
how it grows, how you vent it,
and what what works in an ever challenging climate.
And talking to friends, people are doing that type of, hey, I took a little plot and I'm growing.
Yeah, I got a little Aligote. We planted 30, 40 vines of Tannat. So there's that was kind of a post-fire opportunity where we had some vines that we needed to graft over. But those are little tweaks, little special sauces in the property that kind of add layers and hopefully help you learn, for now and for the future.
All right, Braiden, we got to take a quick break. We're talking to Braiden Albrecht. Braiden is the winemaker from Mayacamas, on Mount Feeder in the Napa Valley. When we come back, we're going to taste the second wine. I think it's a Merlot.
Yeah, 22 Merlot.
22 Merlot, and we're going to get into the vineyards and the wines. So you're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. We're back with our guest, Braiden Albrecht. Braiden is the winemaker for over a decade at Mayacamas. All right, so let's talk about Mayacamas, the winery, the vineyards. Like you said earlier, there's over 450 plus acres, over 50 dedicated to vineyards. So it's a gorgeous piece of property. What I want you to do quickly is paint a picture for me about Mayacamas. Tell me about location, geography, climate. You have multiple exposures, or you're predominantly, south or whatever. And the soils, we tipped off a little. We said the word volcanic. And this is what you live and work in.
Right.
So, don't spend a lot of time. Just set it up for me.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we're the very top of Mount Veeder. Mount Veeder being kind of the highest peak in the Mayacamas range in the southern part of the range. So, I think when you think of Mount Veeder, there's a lot of variation in Mount Veeder. There can be more canyon and lower elevation vineyards that have different exposures. But where we are, we don't have any kind of large mountain range shading us. So we're very very much kind of ridge top and kind of south, kind of the southern face of Mount Veeder summit. So we have a lot of great exposures, different soil profiles, different and really almost every different kind of exposure aspect you can think of. You said we have 465 total acres. Those 50 acres of vineyard are kind of carved east to west in really 4 distinct zones. There's 26 blocks, but gosh, so many more than that in terms of how we pick.
Wow.
There's not a lot of homogeneous in the mountains in general, but up there there's no shortage of different soil profiles within block. So there's really a great color palette to work with on flavor development across the varieties we work with.
What's the elevation difference from the lower plot to the highest?
Yeah, so the lowest Chardonnay block kind of bottoms out at like 1,750 feet. That's like where the lowest vine is, and then the highest Cabernet vine just goes up just below 2,300 feet. So it's a pretty big vertical change. Down by the winery, you're at about 1,800 feet, and then as you move west towards the top of the mountain, you're climbing up towards 23, and then the property goes up to 2,600 feet. So it's in terms of hillside Napa, there's other vineyards that are higher elevation, but we're close.
On Veeder, Mount Veeder, or in Napa?
There's at least one vineyard that's a little bit higher than us on Veeder, and then I'm sure over in Howell Mountain and Atlas Peak, there's probably some vineyards that are higher than us elevation wise. But all in all, I think less about elevation in terms of the top end of it being impactful, more about where the low end is, and I think from a climate perspective, why that's important is where is the marine layer in a particular year. So usually for us, on Veeder, the marine layer is going to be somewhere between 1,500 and 1,700 feet. So most of the summer,
marine layer is that layer of fog or moisture that's kind of level and comes across.
Yeah, that comes in usually through the San Pablo Bay.
So
and up
technically,
valley.
you could be above it and below it based on your elevation and plantings, right?
And depending on the year, kind of there's different thickness, kind of marine layer thickness can change. But usually, we're above it. So we have in the summers, say we have slightly warmer nights than the valley floor because we don't get that kind of air conditioning coming on. The daytime
Right.
highs will be a little bit lower than, say, if you're in St. Helena or something. But a tighter diurnal shift in the summer is kind of a unique part of our site, which really kind of, we might be behind in the growing season to start the year because it's cooler in the winter up there, and then those warm nights in the summer we kind of catch up with the valley floor.
Lastly, the soils fit an overall profile, but from block to block, there's some difference, or it's pretty.
There's a ton of variation.
There is a ton of variation.
It's mostly.
But is it categorized? If you had to categorize the soil on the property,
I would say volcanically derived, and at different states of kind of weathering. And there's volcanic can mean a lot of different things. So it's tricky, but you have soils down at the bottom that are this volcanic ash, kind of rhyolitic ash called like tufa, which is feels like you're walking on the moon almost.
Right.
And then you go up to our sunset block, say, and it's these kind of rhyolitic cobbles that are these fist-sized cobbles.
Smoother?
Both no, pretty rough. And almost
volcanic.
No soil. It's very, very, very rough. So they're both
darker,
volcanic.
lighter, medium color?
They'd be like kind of medium color, kind of like light brown to dark
It's not like
dark
Mount
brown.
Etna that just blew up where it's like black.
No, though we do have some black clay in some of our some of our Merlot blocks on the west side. So there's so many different. There's a lot of nuance within block even, but certainly across block. But I usually say volcanically derived and different weathered states. So there is probably some sedimentary upwelling in different blocks as well. So it's nuanced to say the least.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about farming practices. I want to talk to you about cellar practices. Talk about the wines and all that. But during the conversation, just keep this in the back of your mind. And you're living this is, how you hold on to tradition, which you inherited, not begrudgingly. I mean, they earned the tradition, but how you move forward, introducing necessary new tweaks and not, shaking up the apple cart. So, when we talk about all that, tell me, if and where there are things you had to change, because we'll get to it. But I mean, you had to do some significant replanting, right?
Yeah.
We did. All right. So let's go back to something we talked about. You started farming organically in 2013 at the behest recommendation of Phil Kotori.
Yeah, I mean that we
was that a sell to the Schottensteins or anything? Like, hey, you got to do this, and they're like, why?
That decision was always their decision to farm organically, and so Phil was an obvious choice to do that. He's been farming organically before it was cool, before everyone was doing it. He's probably close to 50 years of organic viticulture experience now, if not quite 50, and particularly in the Mayacamas range, or but more on the Sonoma side, in the Moon Mountain district, there wasn't a better person in our mind to head down that route. But the certification process started in 2013. We were certified in 2016.
Right,
it's a 3-year.
Go backwards for a second. I'm always curious with vineyards when they do that, and some people are so strict they move to biodynamics and regenerative. What condition was the vineyard in? Was it treated? Did you have to bring it back, or it wasn't? It was kind of a lower. Where were you?
The vineyards that we inherited certainly had some challenges. There's no question. There was a lot of, there was an old chemical shed where we were like, how do we dispose of this?
I know you don't outwardly talk. You'll talk about it.
Yeah, but it was a different
don't
era,
forget it's the past.
No, totally. And I don't even know.
But it was going on. So you had to do some work.
Yeah.
And that's where Phil is so good.
That's where he is great. Yeah. And I think with our process, a lot of that was, okay, let's fallow some of these blocks. Let's let these vineyards recover. Let's cover crop them and protect the soils, let them regenerate, build organic material, and
so that whole program of getting there, building organic material, cover, all that stuff, that all started happening.
In 13, yeah.
Now, you said you got certified 3 years later. Did it take that long to do that, or you just felt you were ready then?
That's a CCOF, California Certified Organic. That's kind of the
cycle
the cycle.
Okay.
So that
I don't care. It's more curious than.
We were farming. We would have,
earlier.
If we had gone there in 13, the methods that we were using at 16 were the same. They don't certify it until it's been 3 years, and that's for CCOF. But there's longer ones. I think I'm sure if you're going biodynamic or regenerative, it may be a longer hold periods, or arguably it should be, I think, to really see the true benefit. But your farming doesn't really change. It's just about whether it's certified or not.
Right. So here's another thing I'm curious about. And tell me if you have this circumstance available to you and you've experienced. Do you have pre-2013, technically pre-organic wines, and do you have post-2013, a few years into it, where you've tasted, and can you discern any difference? You know what the big description is. It's much more lively and energetic. But have you experienced that comparison?
Yeah, the block I can really think about, because when we took over, there was of the 50 acres of vineyard, about 30 were in production. So there was 20 that had kind of were on the edge and needed some additional TLC, but that weren't producing. But we basically picked and ripped most of the vineyard in 13. So took out all but 3 blocks. Really? So I got to know the 13, the wines from the vineyards we had in 13. And then with the exception of those 3 blocks, it wasn't like we had this starting, this before and after the farming change, right. Other than in particularly in this one vineyard, Golden Hill, which is kind of a Martha's clone of Cabernet on 110R that we ended up having to replant after the fires in 17 because that we lost about 50% of the vines in that fire. But no, I got to see Golden Hill. I would say we didn't farm, like we started the process to farm organically in 13, but that the sale didn't happen until May. So you're probably, for better or worse, that vintage probably was more conventional,
right?
Anyways, so that would be one block I got to see, and I would say, it's tough to kind of parse out vintage from viticulture sometimes, but I'd say towards the end there in 16 and 17, there was definitely new life in that block in terms of how the wine was tasting.
So it was discernible.
Yeah,
no doubt.
It was.
I think that's what you do it for.
And I think some of it's also knowing the block a little bit better. And harvesting it differently, but also I like to think that there was a little bit more vitality in the wine. There certainly was in the soil, and the soils are it's a pretty obvious transition there.
That's an even more important. You saw the progression of soil vitality.
100%. Yeah, I talked about that moon block, the tufa. Like the first year I walked out there, you're literally sinking into this soil, like 3 to 6 inches.
Crazy, right?
It feels like you're like I haven't walked on the moon, obviously, but it's very, very ashy. That block now, after a decade of organic farming, is totally different. Very firm.
That point, do you get crazy or get the bug and say, let's go biodynamic, or we have to be? The goal is to farm regeneratively.
That's certainly.
Is it necessary? Not necessary? Is it cost prohibitive? Is it a goal?
Oh, it's certainly a goal. And we have elements of biodynamics, and of regenerative. I'm sure already kind of involved.
Right.
Yeah, we have we have the compost, and we have that we're generating. We have a biodynamic prep garden that will introduce into our compost and compost teas. So we're doing some of that. We aren't certified,
right?
And largely, I think for me it was more about. Having the bandwidth to really fully go in and get behind it and do it the right way versus doing it to kind of have another certification because obviously there's a lot of redevelopment, so that takes a lot of time, and then you had fires that kind of threw.
So let's talk about that. But before that, so you farm organically. You're even doing aspects of, biodynamics, regenerative. It's hard to argue, to try to get there. Mm-hmm. But what are the other things you're doing? It may fall like, are you dry farming, cover crops no tilling? Yeah. Tell me the practices that you always abide by.
Sure. So, I think, if you're starting at the beginning of the year or really the end of harvest, we have about 30 head of sheep that will do usually two grazing passes, 30 to 60 sheep.
You bring those in?
Passes. We have them on property year round.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
cool.
There are our post-harvest to bud break. They're in the vineyards.
Nice.
So they're our first and second mow pass, I guess you'd say, with a little bit of fertilization in there. And then after bud break, because that scares me still. We create these big forest blocks, so they're kind of part of our fire defense too. So they'll kind of take down light and flashy fuels and help us get into the different parts of the forest. So that's kind of that's probably the third. Are we in our third year of that? Yeah. So we've been doing that for 3 years now, and that's again kind of one of those things that just happened naturally, where we didn't really set out to do that, but we're like, okay, well How can we deal with 465 acres of vegetation? Well, maybe animals would help, and then obviously we could use those in the vineyard as well. So that's been that. The sheep are kind of the first part of it, and then in terms of dry farming, so everything's set up for irrigation with what we call dual drip poly. Two different irrigation lines. So there's a primary and a secondary line. And that basically means that, you can water the entire block. I can water everything from my phone, which is pretty cool. Doesn't mean it's verified. You got to go check to make sure it's blown out.
Remember I said, how do you hold on to tradition? And you could irrigate from your phone.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's definitely it. I think irrigation's not new. How you do it is a tweak, right?
It's true. I mean, Romero, our foreman, he still turns it on manual, but
it's comfortable.
It's comfortable.
Yeah.
But no, I think you want to find that line where I think for us, using resources efficiently is super important. And then figuring out and making sure we're tracking what we're doing is also important. So that the irrigation from the phone is an efficiency measure and also a tracking measure. Like, how many times did I irrigate that block? So anyways, it's
right.
But the primary and secondary, what that gives you the ability to do is there are certain blocks that I'm only going to water on a secondary or not at all. So we are dry farming certain blocks. And then the secondaries are really punched at weak vines. So you're adding an emitter at a weak vine. And this is not terribly uncommon in Napa. We're not the only people doing this, but it helps your water use quite a bit. It reduces your water use and also allows for more uniformity. So you don't need to water. I have blocks that I don't need. If I water them, I've made a mistake.
Right.
But there's plenty of weak vines or parts of the block that might need a little bit. So we're dry farming. We're dry farming certain blocks. We're not dry farming everything. And then the tilling question is we have a kind of a mow crimp sort of program where we'll kind of mow and then crimp the alternate row. So it's not not really tilling. Crimping is obviously a little different. So, but there are blocks that as we've redeveloped that still need a little bit of ripping, but it's not like
you kind of do what you have to wear. I mean, you follow the majority of what you're doing is constant and
it evolves as the vines get older because our average vine age on property is still younger. So I would still some of our blocks are still in third or like fifth leaf. So they're still in development phase.
So let's talk about two things. The first thing is, while I'm going to ask you the next question, I want you to pour out some of that Merlot. All right. And while you're doing that, I couldn't figure this out, so I need you to tell me. You've gone through an extensive replanting, and it's not like you've been done for 5-6 years. I think you're just hitting the end or whatever. I'm just curious why you replanted. Did you have to? Did you want to? When did you start? Did it take longer than you thought? What's the replanting story? Because everyone replants when they have to, or disease, whatever. But what's your story?
Yeah, so I think I think that there was a number of drivers in the replant. There was a lot of virus in the old plantings. There was and there was a lot of rootstock that was, if it wasn't virus, was prone to it. A lot of AXR was still planted, so phylloxera risk. And then I think
So planting to protect,
and
very logical. So
that was the biggest driver. And then I think when you're thinking about doing that.
How old were the vines
that we replanted?
We're plucking out, yeah.
Some of the older ones would have been like 65.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we had some of the older, and 65 to probably 25, something like that.
Yeah.
Which, it was tough. It was a tough decision. I think it wasn't like there were certain blocks that were old that should have been ripped out because they were not producing good wine.
So the tough decision is cost and time, right?
Cost and time.
It costs manually to do it. Time, it takes years to get them out and to bring them back, right? It's kind of dormant.
Yeah, and for
so
us,
when did you start this?
We started the replant in 2013, and then everything was back in the ground by. Well, it was 21, I think, the last year. So we did it slowly.
Wow.
And
patient, right?
Yeah, and I think it was a great opportunity also to think about. Obviously this vineyard was planted. In some cases, the older vines were planted in the 50s. The climate in the 50s was different.
Right.
And so
you have a chance to
think about the property from
you and I could do a show on climate change, relative to what you would pick. We won't go there right now, but you had that opportunity. Mm-hmm. Is it your rootstock or whatever you call it?
Our clonal material, yeah.
Clonal material, and then
we
what
have
do you call
some
when
of
you
that.
connect it?
The grafting.
The grafting. Yeah. So it's your clonal material and you're grafting it.
In some sense, yeah. Well, there's a mix of things, right? So we have we have a lot of different rootstocks out there. A lot of them driven by what was there before and what works stylistically. So a lot of drought tolerant rootstocks, which Bob had planted. Other than AXR, which we didn't go back to for obvious reasons. But a lot of 110R, a lot of St. George, and those were on property before we knew they worked. And then the clonal material on the Cabernet, on the Cabernet, there was a lot of Martha's clone. So we went back to that. We went back to that with not with our version of it, with another cleaned up version of it that we got. But now we saved our plant material and sent it to Davis, and now have a cleaned up version of the Mayacamas Martha's kind of coming into. So as we get. It's a slow trickle of buds every year, but we'll replant that. And then on the Chardonnay side of things, it was primarily a Wente clone, which we went back to in with about 65% of the replant on the Chardonnay is back to the Wente clone with a few other things.
Do you have sort of this preconceived formula like, I'm not making wine for at least 5 years? Or is it situational and circumstantial? After 4 years, or if you say 8, after 6. I mean, is there like a formula that usually works?
Yeah, well, I mean, so your third leaf is your first fruit.
Third leaf is the third season of growing?
Yeah.
Is that what you wine guys call it?
Yeah,
third leaf?
Third leaf, the third season of growing, that's your first fruit. But it's also, it's not very much. And you're really farming. The yield
is low.
Yeah, maybe you're getting a half ton an acre or something like that, or less, quarter ton.
And what's the most obvious thing about a third leaf? It's young, but is it vegetal? I mean, what
the wine? The wines. I'd say the wines will be more season dependent because I think one thing about young vines is they don't have the root depth to deal with tough vintages. So. You can. I think you could have a vintage like 23, you'd have pretty good third leaf quality fruit because it wasn't a terribly challenging vintage. If you have a couple heat waves though, then you're really it's gonna ripen.
You could kind of
make
it through.
Yeah, it'll be ripe. It'll ripen very quickly. It'll be kind of obtuse. Maybe where phenolic ripeness and sugar loading aren't in balance.
What comes online quicker, Chard or Cab? I would think Chard.
Yeah, Chard. Yeah, Chardonnay for sure.
Seems kind of obvious.
At least and feel like we had our first vintage of Chardonnay off the replants in 2017. Same with the Cabernets. And in that sense, in that vintage, both of them, were vinified separately and made it into the blends without issue. So, but we had vineyards that we were working with grower vineyards to kind of bridge the gap on the replant timing.
Right.
And we kept those through especially on the Cabernets through the 2019 vintage, just because let's make sure that what we are growing is up to snuff. And
was 19.
Mm-hmm.
Does that indicate the last outside grape selection?
Or? No. So up until, actually the 2025 will be the first year where 100% of the Cabernet will be estate. The Merlot,
you excited about that?
Oh yeah, I'm excited. The different
right?
varieties are, the Merlot has been 100% estate since 2018 or 2019, I think.
Right.
And the Chardonnay we still have is probably I think we'll still use a little bit of grower fruit in there. That's about 70% estate. The 2023 you tried, but the Cabernet. I'm excited for everything to be estate. But also we have some great growers.
Getting back to where you were,
right?
Yeah. I'm sure for how hard you work on your own property, you demand or look for that as much with outside guys.
Exactly. And we also
back to my point about Napa, slow to be sustainable and all that, you got to look around for the right guy.
Totally. And when we found the growers that we've been partnering with, a lot of these growers Bob Travers was working with. So there's
relationship.
There's this, and there's also in bottle continuity, right? So you want to make sure that that if you're gonna move on from a grower, that you have something on site that can kind of give you a similar profile, so that there's not this big change all of a sudden, or if it's more gradual.
That's on you to identify that.
But I was surprised, I would say, in the first few vintages with really young fruit.
Pretty good.
It was really good. It was better. It was, not to say it was better than the grower fruit, but it was really good. So
everything we've just talked about, farming and tradition, there should be no surprise there. Thank God. So,
right.
But you're still, the odds are against you with younger vines and blah, blah, blah. All right. So we have this 22 Merlot in front of us. And I don't drink a lot of Merlot. I drink it blended with a lot of other wines.
And I should say this is not 100% Merlot. So this is
what's in here?
This is 76% Merlot, 24% Cabernet Franc.
So that's why I love it, because and I'm not like a Merlot naysayer, like it's too soft or the sideways BS and all that. You live one life. You drink what you want.
Right.
I could drink Cab over Merlot, but I drink a lot of Merlot with Cab. So this is predominantly. So tell me about this wine. Tell me 22 vintage. There's a blend here you're talking about.
Yeah, so 22 with vintage was a warmer year, certainly. And really, I think the biggest kind of season event, if you will, was this heat wave that was right at the end of August, beginning of September, that really pushed everything in the hills in particular towards early ripening. We were in a warm vintage, we'll see a compression of harvest dates from white to red of about, it'll be about 3 weeks from when our first fruit comes off to the last fruit.
What happened here?
That was that compression.
Oh, so that was.
22 is a warm year. Think about 23. That was almost 10, 12 weeks.
So in the hills, it's like a quarter, a third.
So everything basically gets ready really fast in the hills in a warm year. So the 22 with that heat wave in particular at the end of August, everything was ready to go. So I think the bounds on the Merlot Cab Franc vintage was probably 2 weeks, if not tighter than that. So you're picking beginning of September, which is not uncommon for us in our red varieties. Our first pick of Cabernet and Merlot usually is right there, beginning of September. But you kind of have the blocks that you would let hang longer. That even those are coming up a little bit.
So let's.
To me, the wine is a
great, beautiful, deep color.
It's got
on the nose. So if I asked you, because you're an expert, if I said nose descriptors traditionally on Merlot, even just yours, but what are like the 2-3 things that always?
Well, Merlot, you're always talking fruit, right? You're always talking.
Okay, so fruit-driven nose.
Fruit-driven nose, and obviously,
is it darker fruits or it varies?
For us, I'd say it's probably a little bit lighter. Lighter fruit descriptors are going to be more red fruited than
red fruit. Right, I get
fruited.
red here.
So I think that's pretty common. Again, because for us, we're gonna be harvesting these again on to maintain freshness. So usually we're going to be red fruit, blue fruit on both varieties, but the Merlot tends to be a little bit lighter fruit color,
right.
fruit descriptors.
What you said you blended cab in, so you said 70 something?
24% Cab Franc. So we have
Franc.
Yeah, Franc.
Oh, for some reason, of course, I blanked you out and thought you said Cab.
No, yeah.
So Cab Franc.
Yeah, so kind of
Is
more
it
of a
always Cab Franc Merlot or?
Yeah, that's the new.
And what is it about
recipe.
why you put Cab Franc in there? What does it do to get it to the wine that you want?
I think it gives a touch more length, there's a little bit more tannin.
I was just going to say this is not a tannic wine, but this is a more tannic Merlot.
Right. It just kind of braces and gives that length somewhere to something to hang on to.
Absolutely.
On the edges.
This is a big boy Merlot.
Right. And
in a good way.
Yeah. No. And I think again from a vintage that's a richer vintage too. It's and I think maybe one of my favorite features of Cabernet Franc is the aromatics. There's always like this really pretty kind of floral almost.
That's why like for 100% Merlot, which I had no idea. I'm like, Jesus, this is different. It
makes kind of getting that violet aromatics from Franc, which I've always loved.
So there's that violet in there, and then when you go back to the palate, there's the fruits, definitely fruit driven, blue.
Yeah, and I think you get a touch of herbaceousness too from Franc,
from the Cab Franc.
And you don't really get that with them when it's just the Merlot by itself. I mean, you can because I think that
or even a Cab Sauv that has no vegetal quality. You won't get that.
Right. No, totally.
So it makes it more interesting. It's a very interesting, delicious. The mouthfeel is not thin. It's not cloying. It's really what's good foods with this wine? Give me.
I mean, I think. I mean, certainly it would go great with kind of a
bloody burger.
Yeah, a good burger or a steak. It would have no problem to stand up to that. I also think you get into some kind of richer, kind of gamier pastas would do well with it.
It's all about the sauce.
Yeah, I think so. And
you think pasta and this, but it's all about matching to even fish with a crazy sauce on it.
Yeah, definitely. To it. Oh yeah, I think it's got. I mean, hopefully all of our wines have the acid to kind of complement meals in a lot of different directions.
This is a good food wine. I'm not yanking you, but this is one of the better Merlots I've had in a long time.
No,
seriously, and maybe people think you're cheating because you put Cab Franc on it, but screw that. Yeah. It's 70+%. It's a terrific Merlot.
Yeah, I think for the Merlot, I mean for us, I think they marry each other well on this property. I mean we have about just under 5 acres of Merlot planted. We have just over 3 acres of Cab Franc planted.
Do you ever screw around and do 100% Cab Franc?
We ferment them 100%. Yeah, I would.
Do you ever bottle it?
I haven't bottled any yet.
Come on, man.
I'm working on it.
Coming out next year. You better have a bottle.
We don't want to have too many SKUs. We got to have.
So here was I'm going to give you my last question of the interview.
Okay.
Now, okay. The question was, a lot of winemakers have side projects and make a few barrels in their garage. Are you doing that? So yes or no?
No.
Okay. So you and we're going to do that with the Cab Franc project. Okay. So I won't ask you that question anymore.
Hey,
all right. So that's the 2022 Mayacamas Merlot. It's the Mount Veeder Napa Valley. All right. Before we kind of finish up, let's just talk about cellar practices. There are definitely common. I mean, you don't make Chard the way you make Cab and all that, but there are the common threads in barreling and fermentation and all that. Let's talk the red wines first because we just had one.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, I mean, obviously across the board, pick timing drives a lot of what we do. So, again, all kind of earlier in harvest, usually beginning of September.
Early pick.
Red
Early
fruit
pick
driven.
Preserves acidity.
Preserves acidity, lower sugar,
less big wines,
lower alcohols. Our process is pretty simple. Assuming it's a good vintage, we're just going to cluster sort and destem, so we don't have an optical sorter or
all destemming.
Yeah, from the reds, all destemming.
Okay.
On the whites, whole cluster.
Okay.
I should say we did one Cab Franc this last year
with the stems,
100% whole cluster. It was. I think it was like 500 liter that we popped the head off. So we'll see. It's actually pretty tasty. We only have like 30 gallons of it. It'll go into the.
That's what I'm talking about before.
But yeah, we have all these little fun kind of these little experiments going on.
Cab is destemmed.
Yep, Cab Merlot, Cab Franc. Most of the time, we're going to be
crushed,
destemmed.
and then where does it go?
Into fermentation. So we have a lot of different fermentation vessels. We talked about the concretes earlier. So we'll do, in a typical vintage, the cab will probably see 50% of its fermentation in concrete, and then 50% or 45, say, in stainless steel, with 5 in wood. So we have big open vat concrete
neutral
fermenters.
wood, right?
Neutral wood.
Do you ever touch new oak?
Every now and again. Let's say I don't get a lot of trips to France because I'm a big barrel buyer.
Right. They see you coming, they turn around.
No, everyone wants to be part of the program, but I'm like, I'm only going to buy 2. So I only have room. Yeah. No, but I mean, we can
wait in the men's room.
We bring them in, and new oak comes into the program, largely through attrition.
Right.
But we bring in more. We've gone to a little bit more 500 and 600 liter as our smaller barrel.
What does that compare to what people perceive
so
as a
in
barrel?
in Napa, right, it's always our élevage. I'm skipping ahead, out of harvest a little bit, but our élevage for the Cabernets is going to be 30 to 34 months in oak, and that's usually going to mean 2 years.
That's longer than normal, right?
Usually for Cabernets and for Merlots, it'll be 24 months.
This may be redundant, but preceding the élevage, what happened? It was crushed and then went into the fermentation. We don't do any like cold soak, and our maceration times are fairly short. So you're probably on skins for, call it 20 days, and then press to barrel. So then you're starting your élevage, and usually there's a lot of nuance within how that happens for each lot. You're really evaluating what is this fermentation. That's where I don't want to get.
Yeah, we don't need to get into the nuance of that. But typically, what we say for the Cabernets is, again, 34 months, and usually 24 months. That's going to be in large format neutral oak. So that's 300 gallon up to 1,200 gallon Foudre, various ages, sizes, shapes.
Was there stuff there for many years when you got there?
Yeah, we have
old Foudres.
We have some OGs, some like Tank 8 is
like, I've been to Europe and there's some crazy artwork on the front of some of these.
Oh yeah, we don't have any cool artwork on it, but there's about five really old tanks. One of them's from over 100 years old. The other ones are like 70. The paperwork's a little bit loose, so I usually say it's around 100. It's around 80, and then you have everything in between. So I think those are still in use. You go to some of the Valley floor wineries that maybe have that history. I was at Louis Martini for auction Napa Valley this last week, and you walk in and there's this retired Foudre that's very dry and doesn't hold anything. You walk into our cellar; those are in use, it's not really a museum. So the wines will spend 2 years with rackings and kind of blendings happening, but they'll spend 2 years loosely in those larger vessels, and then a year in kind of the standard Napa 225 liter. Do
they spend time in the bottle?
Yeah, and then they'll be in bottle for a year before
they will
release.
Be for a year.
So it's about 4 years from harvest to release. Merlot's a little bit different. It's that process with 1 year in large format and 1 year in barrel. So it's 20 to 24 months. So a little bit faster. That way these two wines have they're released on a kind of a year off from each other.
And the Chard, like you said, you're doing whole cluster.
About 50%.
No mallow, you said.
Right, no mallow. No mallow we can control.
And you ferment it in various wood, only wood?
Mostly wood.
Does it see any stainless?
It can see some stainless in fermentation, and also
it's funny how your cab sees more stainless than your Chard, right?
It's really we can do a fermentation or two for Chardonnay and stainless, but largely it's a real estate problem. Like where by the time we're ready to get into the Cabernet, I'm gonna need that stainless steel tank for Cabernet.
Right.
So then you have to get it somewhere else.
Get out of here, yeah.
Because we were a pretty small winery for how much, square footage wise for how much wine we produce. We only have like 6,000 square feet of refrigerated space. So it's really small.
Some of the best restaurants. The kitchen's a little corner,
totally.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So the Chardonnay will be.
Is it a dream one day? Not selfishly, but just to make a more manageable winery, or
we've looked at it a few times, and it's just the politics of Napa is
that's
right now
part of it.
Politics.
It's not so much your desires; it's the aggravation.
It's definitely we've looked at it far enough down where we've gotten into designs in two different areas where we thought, okay, maybe we'll do this, but we're at the end of a dirt road on top of a mountain in a fire-prone area.
Right.
So, that neighbors can kind of get worried about that. And, for us, it's never been about expansion. It's been more about if we're going to do it, how can we make our process a little bit easier and more, more efficient. So I don't see it happening for quite some time because we're also grandfathered. We're one of the old school wineries that is kind of grandfathered into a lot of things. Anytime you add a little bit, it opens up a whole nother can of worms.
It's a whole new thing, yeah.
So we're happy with where we are. But I like your point about the smallest. Sometimes the smallest kitchens produce pretty good food. So
absolutely. I'll give you 10 examples if you want. But all right, so you make predominantly Cabernet. What percentage would you say of your output is Cabernet? 50, 60%?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then next would be what?
Chardonnay. Yeah, and that's that makes up a good chunk too. Probably 30%.
And is the Grenache Rosé growing, or you've been making about the same for? I would think it would be popular, and
it's been.
If you made more, you could sell more. Type thing.
Exactly. So we do about 200 cases of Grenache Grenache Rosé, and that's again we talked a little bit about that before, but it's a kosher Grenache Rosé. We have a kosher program.
Thank you for bringing that up because you and I off air talked about the fact that you have an extensive, for a small winery, kosher wine program. Mm-hmm. So all the wines we talked about, what's available?
So we make, so I guess first
varietally
on the type of kosher wine we make. So we make non-mavushal kosher for Passover. So that means that our process is going to be overseen by a rabbi or someone who is Orthodox and is observant. So we have Rabbi. He'll hate that I call him Rabbi, but we call him Rabbi David and Rabbi Dan, though they're not rabbis.
Okay.
But they'll go through the process from when the berry breaks away from the stem all the way to when we have a cork and a capsule, and that's,
really
they control all the movement of the wine at our direction.
So they're in and out of there during the whole season.
Oh yeah. David's probably there. I think he's going to be there tomorrow to the winery for a rack and return. So we make a Cabernet Sauvignon, we make a Chardonnay, we make a Sauvignon Blanc, and we make a Rosé, all in the kosher program.
Now, you're not a huge winery. You don't make a lot of wine. You make less kosher wine. Mm-hmm. It's during the holiday season. If I look, will I find it?
It's mostly direct to consumer.
It is. So if you're interested in this, go to the website.
Reach out,
which we'll talk about towards the end.
Yeah.
How to get more information.
Though there's a lot of interest in particular in New York and in LA to have these wines go into distribution.
Where all the Jews are.
Yeah, well, South Florida too.
There's not. You haven't gotten a lot of pull out of South Dakota.
Not for the kosher wines.
Yeah,
but the Shonsons live. They live in South Florida, and so we have a good amount that goes there, good amount that goes to New York, and we'll see if it ever makes it in a restaurant. I was fascinated.
So when we tell people where to go to get more info, we'll remind them that's where all right, I got to kind of wind things down. Mm-hmm. Just quickly, you make a little Sauv Blanc, right?
Yep, we do.
You have Sauv Blanc Rose on the property. And do you make less Sauv Blanc than the Grenache Rosé or similar? It's
about the same.
It is.
It really depends a little bit on the year, but we have.
Why do you make a Sauv Blanc?
It was part of the program when we started, and it's a great high acid kind of fun wine. We really like making.
It's funny because in Napa, like cake bread on 29. They've been making Sauv Blanc for a million years. It's like, why did whatever.
I've always loved the wines of of Sancerre and Pouilly-Fuissé.
Yeah.
So I've always loved the.
So you're looking at those styles. That's inspiration.
Yeah, we're not making a Dagenau style, but certainly
don't think
more.
People expect that from you.
No, but I think it's certainly more mineral driven, high acid. Similar tenets to the Chardonnay program, just transposed into the Sauvignon Blanc and.
So let's wrap up. I just had one question. I think habits of wine drinking is changing. I think consumption is down. I think the consumer has changed. Are you feeling that? Are you small enough and have such a following?
Yeah, I think we're insulated from it to some extent, but I think everyone is feeling it.
But your scale and your product, it's okay.
Yeah, and I think.
But you hear about it. Are tariffs an issue with you, or are you not? Not that you're insulated; they just don't affect you as much.
No, they do. I think we had. We have our export business is good, or it was. We had pretty good, pretty good business into Ontario. That's certainly gone. It's definitely presenting some challenges.
Like if you were an importer where 40% of your wines were from France, that tariff thing.
Right.
You're talking,
it's on the margins.
There's a recognition of that something's happening.
And then on the production side, all of our barrels, if wherever we're buying those from, usually it's going to be France and from Austria. Those are going to get. Those are usually it's kind of a shared burden where the producer and the cooperage is going to take on it. Again, that's grand scheme of things. We can ride that out. It's a 10% tariff right now.
Right.
But it's I think, and then probably I would say the consumption and the changing drinking patterns is probably more of a concern than the tariffs.
I think tariffs will settle in. I think the consumption thing is generationally moving to different habits. So.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It's you never know. Every individual has a kind of a different reason for what they why they the way they enjoy wine. And I think some of it you kind of expect to change as different demographics, different kind of generations, get into different earning parts of their career. Obviously Napa's built a lot on boomer expending.
Boomer, collector, moneyed,
right.
Educated, little less concerned about health, would go out on a Friday and have 3 glasses. Not so much with this generation.
Totally.
Not willing to spend the money. But what they're interested in is the sourcing. Mm-hmm. Sustainable, organic, and the story.
Right.
Which and you check that box pretty
right.
well.
We have that legacy to lean into.
Yeah.
But we see a lot of people. We have a great experience up at the winery for guests. We have a downtown Napa location, and then we have our estate.
In the town in Napa?
Yeah, after the fires in 2017, when our hospitality space burned down, we opened up a spot down there, and something that we've kept.
And then reopened at the winery.
Right.
And kept Napa.
Exactly. We reopened at the end of 21 on the mountain. So it's great because we can, if you have, sometimes coming up the mountain means you got to commit to 2 hours or something like that. If you
get a different traffic.
And you can, if you're down having dinner, you can go there for a glass. It's been great. But if you go up to the mountain, you're going to go on an ATV.
It's
see
a different
the vineyard,
experience.
Walk through the cellar. But it's been great to have both. So we see we have no shortage of people coming up to visit. But again, it's like, a lot of experience driven tours.
It's a commitment, to your point.
Right. But hopefully those are all building just long-term relationships where people like what we're doing, getting exposed to the wines, and then
I think
they're going to be long-term
supporters. If they're making the commitment to not so much stop by the tasting room, because people do that, but to come to a vineyard, spend a few hours there. They went there for a reason, and they're walking out. Right. Buying stuff and entranced by the whole, because it is that. No, it's not, I
still have that. I've been working there for long. I go up there.
Saying.
There's a magic to that place that I think our team does a great job sharing with everybody.
All right. We finished the show with 2 segments, the wine list and then the weekly wine sip, which we're going to taste our 3rd wine, not yet. The wine list is 5 questions that I've asked every one of my guests since show 1. Cool. And it's the same 5 questions. I want you to be spontaneous. I don't want you to dwell on this. We got to get in and out of this in relatively good time, all right? So the first question is, what are you drinking now? The reference is, what's in your fridge? What are you curious about? Do the seasons change and you move from one thing to another? Could be beer. What are you drinking now?
I'm definitely more of a season change wine drinker.
So from what to what for starters?
So winter, this last winter I was pretty heavy in Barolo and
Barbaresco. Right?
Yeah, I mean I love those wines.
If you had a desert island, had to pick Barolo or Barbaresco, where do you go?
Man,
it's a tough decision.
No, I don't know that I could make the.
That's a good enough answer. You didn't say, Barolo. I'm fine with that. No, all right, now, so you were drinking not the heavier wines, but seasonal reds. Where are you now? What's in the fridge now?
I mean, certainly, have been drinking a bunch of Sancerres, so kind of into Sauvignon Blanc and then white Burgundy, and then also kind of their counterparts in the New World. So kind of in a white wine.
What do you have a sincere producer, that you?
I mean, when I can go, Vacheron. I think I love Vacheron just for I think there's on structure to the Mayacamas, Sauvignon Blanc, it's a little bit more analogous than say Dagenau.
Right.
But
good point.
But so yeah,
you appreciate both.
I appreciate both.
Yeah.
No question. I had a bottle of 19 or 18 Dagenau Selects a week or two ago. That was singing. I was still too young though.
It's like giving somebody Salah champagne and they go, "What is this?"
Yeah, it's
the Dagenau stuff could be like, "What is?"
It's not my everyday drinker. I'll say that, but those are the ones that are kind of I'm inspired by.
Sure. Did you say Burgundy? Wait, what was this?
I said white Burgundy as well.
White Burgundy. Yeah. Now, do you key in on like Merlot or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really. I certainly love kind of the high acid expressions of Merlot, kind of the more linear models. Obviously, again,
it's expensive.
It's expensive.
Have you found producers, on the middle, lower end that you could drink that are accessible?
No.
Okay, fair enough.
Nothing that comes to mind right now.
All right, we're done with that question. Those are good answers. Yeah. I got some specifics out of you. Favorite wine and food pairing? Goofiest question on the list, but it's not what you and I think are the best. What do you like? And obviously you don't eat it a lot, but what's like, wow.
One of the I remember one of the first times where I really saw, a wine complement a dish was probably my first harvest when I was working harvest in Australia, where it was a late night. So the dessert it was like an apple tart or something like that with it wasn't Yquem, but it was another aged Sauterne. And I was like...
So Sauterne and an apple tart.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh,
was it
wow.
Relatively new vintage? Or
no, it was older.
So it had that deeper color and
I want to say it was like mid-90s. So not like by Sauterne standards, still young, but that was one of those ones where I was... It was just kind of an aha moment where you're like...
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
This is why you... When you really nail a pairing... where everything makes...
That's exactly
the wine is better for the food it's with, and the food is better for the wine it's with.
That's exactly it. All right, third question. Your favorite wine restaurant in our bar? You work pretty hard, but you get out. Are there any go-tos where the wine list is good, the people are nice, the vibe is good, they're knowledgeable?
Oh, so many. I mean, I'd say if I'm in Sonoma and I'm hanging out at home, Glen Ellen Star in Glen Ellen.
What is that? Is that a restaurant or
it's
a
wine
restaurant?
It's
with a great wine program.
With the great wine program.
Glen Ellen Star.
Glen Ellen Star.
I don't know if anybody's ever brought that up.
Oh yeah, they're great. I really love that. Their
Give me something else.
I mean, from a wine bar perspective, Sonoma's Best wine merchant in
that's the name, Sonoma's Best.
Sonoma's
I don't
Best
think anyone else has said that.
Todd Jolly is a good friend of mine. Is the sommelier there? And
is Todd the guy who's now on the internet? Like
he's got a bit of a following now. He's got.
I like. You know why he's good? Because you and I know wine, and his choices are
good.
He's not just hacking stuff or going weird. If you stuck to his recommendations, they're okay. All right, so that's a good one.
Yeah.
So we're in New York. You're in and out of here every now and then. You're lined up. You're in some good places. So when your people take you out, is there any place in New York you're excited to go to or go back to?
Oh, on this trip, let's see. We're not going back to any place I've been in the past. But Kathy Cohn, who runs our wholesale business, she lives in New York. So usually I'm
at just her behest.
Yeah, and she never takes me to the wrong place. But I've had some incredible meals at some of the great restaurants
like
in New York.
Gramercy Tavern.
Yeah, Gramercy Tavern.
Yeah.
Let's see. In kind of the high end, going into 11 Madison Park.
Right.
I would love to try. I haven't been since that menu.
The vegetarian.
The menu changed to vegetarian. I would love to see that. Union Square Cafe is a great one. I mean, there's so many.
You just mentioned three restaurants
Danny
Meyer touched, but no coincidence.
No,
because his attention to wine and food and all that, there's no doubt. And he was always an American wine, so that plays into your winery. Let's leave it at those. Those are great. All right, fourth question: favorite all-time wine? The original intent of the question was, what's the most expensive rare wine you ever drank? And you're around wine. I don't give a crap. Think about everything we discussed. Back to Kidd, Kotori, New Zealand, Australia. Yeah. What's that wine that had an impact on how you think about wine, that changed your thinking, that is memorable? If it's one or two, it's fine. Yeah. But isn't there a wine that
I'll go two different directions. I'll go when I first started at Mayacamas, especially being a kid who grew up in a Cabernet grape growing family, my white wine exposure it was limited for sure. And there was a shiner of 91 Mayacamas that just had like a piece of tape on it, said 91. And we were cleaning house in some sense. We're like, well, we can't sell this. Let's
right.
So I took that one home and got it cold and I forget. I opened it a couple of days later, and it was just kind of mind blowing in the potential for California Chardonnay to age. And I kind of hadn't given. I kind of had California Chardonnay as kind of one big homogenous class of wines that I wasn't that interested in, and that one totally changed. They turned that on its head.
That's a good one.
And then I think from a kind of rare and rare and arguably expensive unicorn sort of wine that. I think especially when you're making Cabernets and you think about the longevity and what's the long-lived Cabernet profile. I was very fortunate to be a part of a dinner where we had a Magnum of 45 Mouton. That was, I think about it fairly often, just in how incredible it was. So, again, talking about story, thinking about. For the 45 vintage,
good everywhere.
Good everywhere.
Burgundy,
Thinking about kind of post-war, the history of just how that even came to be, especially us dealing with fires and thinking about winemaking in challenging times and places. But more than anything, just the wine was.
You bring up a good point because the wine in the glass is what we always talk about, but to me now it's as much the story, the winemaker, the family, the farming, but also that time, 45 and all that. So
I love that about wine, the time travel element.
Yeah.
If I'm deep diving on a bottle, you're thinking about what was happening in the world at that point. And
those are good ones. And I forgot to mention to you, I post these on social media. We do our guest wine lists, and everything you gave me, I will reference next to the
great.
question.
So I got the 45 Mouton on there. Yeah. That's
you fussy,
I don't get to
fussy
drink that.
elitist.
I know, seriously.
No, everybody at this after 300 times they know that's not like your.
I did not buy that.
So here, make it up to me here. The fifth and final question is: recommend to me the best wine around $15, 15, 20, $22. I love asking you this question because everything you just felt you were guilty of, you make You make a wine that is well made and deserves a price, which is a little higher. Mm-hmm. The world of wines you make. But when you're looking for value, like I'll tip you off. Mm-hmm. Muscadet, if you get the right producer, Pepier, you get that for $21, with some oysters, so we could use that as one of the answers. But give me a white and a red where you think there's good value in wine.
Certainly it's easy to think Europe a little bit more so than the New World.
You don't have to. You can go anywhere. Forgot to say.
I think pound for pound. Obviously, they have some more expensive wines too, but I think I've always been really impressed by the wines that Bedrock makes, both red and white, that really deliver on price. Right. That value proposition.
So Bedrock, because aren't they making like some Zins and stuff?
They have Zins
where they could,
Syrahs. Right. They make some. All
right. So Bedrock, I'll take as the reds. What would you say is the white?
Let's see. Value. Whites.
Usually red is harder.
Yeah, I know. Let's see. Value whites. I think, let's see.
You'll go with the Muscadet?
I'll go with the Muscadet, no problem. That's honestly like, I don't find as much of it around. I think on the East Coast, you guys there's a lot more available. Muscadets are, especially because I love high acid whites in the summer.
So without me prompting you and suggesting Muscadet, that definitely fits All right. So let's leave it at that. We're running out of time.
Fair.
All right. So we got to do a wrap up.
Yeah, sure.
Before we wrap up, we do the formal feature, the weekly wine sip, where we taste wine with the winemaker. Why wouldn't I sit with a winemaker, taste this wine, and discuss it? So I'm saying this, not you. We saved the best for last. We saved the Big Daddy, the Cabernet. So every week we taste a different wine on air for our weekly wine sip. This week we're going to taste. Tell me about the wine.
2021 Cabernet Sauvignon, and this is a wine that's about to be released. Will be released in the fall.
Okay.
So preview, just barely. 21 is a really great vintage in Napa. Very small berried, really intense color and tannin.
The berries in general are small because they're mountain grown, but you're citing these were even smaller berries?
Yeah, this was
because of
smaller.
the vintage.
Yeah, this was.
What drove that? Is that temperature, moisture?
Yeah, somewhat. A little bit of both. And more slightly lower humidity. It was also, kind of in a drought era, but really kind of smaller canopies and. Pretty balanced vines, and just really small berries, because of all those things. So it was. I remember this distinctively tasting a couple different ferments, like 2 or 3 days in, and the glass was just black. Just really.
So color
really
wise, we're talking about a deep rooting wine. Here, right?
Definitely. And
typical or a little.
Not terribly far off center, but
I'm not saying this is like, coffee. This is a deep, dark brooding wine.
No, definitely.
Let's go to the nose.
To me, it's always it's had this like really great graphite character to it on the nose. It's kind of the mineral component is pretty dominant right now.
That graphite. Sort of Bordeaux-y.
Yeah, definitely. You certainly have.
Is this 100% cab?
This is 100% cab.
Okay.
And that's, our Cabernets over the years, they ebb and flow between 100% and, and Bob would have some that were like, 90% with a little bit of Franc and Merlot in there.
There's something about this mouthfeel that's untypical of Napa cabs, which are very big and unctuous. Yeah. The feel is, medium, but what's going on in there is like spreading out left to right, up and down.
It's got a lot of depth.
Depth.
Lateral and
is that what I meant?
yeah. Well, but to your point, like it sometimes depth, can mean length. People use it interchangeably with length, but it's pretty coating. That tannic profile is really it's not. It's kind of got. I think in the best vintages, I find this kind of like. It's how I say it. It's got intensity without weight, without feeling heavy.
Right. Which is, why this has its own style and has succeeded at doing it. It delivers what you want from Napa, but not with the qualities of the years, the 80s, and the influences.
Right. This one's got a lot of like great, think about where Mayacamas is. The vineyards that it's surrounded by. It's very forested. There's a lot of kind of bay notes of bay in there, and
a teeny bit of bay menthol.
Yeah, no, definitely. I got that the menthol character. Yeah. It's certainly got plenty of fruit too. But it's
fruit and a little savory.
Yeah, it's got that good balance. Strikes that balance. Yeah.
Food with this, what you would put in a typical meal with a bigger wine.
No, I think
the acidity is great.
The acidity, can handle just about anything. I think it would have no problem with, with a nice dry aged ribeye, something like that.
Juicy burger.
Juicy burger. Again, that's where my mind's at.
Yeah,
I'm a
dry aged juicy burger.
There we go.
Right.
A little double burger from.
All right, so that's the 21 Mayacamas Cabernet Sauvignon. The next cab to come on the market. Like in a few months.
In a few months, yeah.
All right. Braiden, we got to wrap up. Let me do a quick wrap up. I need to get some info from you, and then you got to go kiss people's asses. So if you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at samatthegrapenation.com. That's samatthegrapenation.com. Listen to the Grape Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcast, or wherever you get your pods. Please subscribe to the Grape Nation and you'll get it delivered every week. Leave a review if you like the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at SBenRuby, on X at BenRuby. You can always use the hashtag on both of those, the Grape Nation. We're on Facebook at the Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we'll post Braiden's wine list, those 5 questions and his answers. And I will list on our weekly wine sip the 3 wines we had. We had a Chard, a Merlot, and the Cab. So I'll give you vintage dates and all that stuff. So Braiden, if we want to get more information on Mayacamas, is there a mailing list? What are the releases? Give me some info on where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, Mayacamas.com.
Okay.
Mayacamas.com.
Right.
That's a great source.
Can you order wines on the site?
Yes.
Okay.
You can. Usually we have an open storefront, so you'll be able to find the wines that are released and current and usually some library. We have offerings that go out in the spring and in the fall. We also have holiday offerings as well. So you go onto the website and you can give us a call, and we have a great team who can direct people in the right direction.
Great.
Get people going in the right direction.
And on social media, do you personally post?
No.
You're a light user?
I'm a light user.
Does the winery have a site where they'll push stuff out?
Yeah, we have an Instagram. It's at Mayacamas.
Okay. Same spelling.
At Mayacamas Vineyards, probably.
Are you too busy to do social media, or are you just not a big fan of?
It ebbs and flows. Right now, it's one of those things where, I find that I get too caught up in it sometimes. Not in anything other than.
No, I know what you mean. They're caught up where you should be doing other things.
I'm wasting my time on it. Less about
you're lurking
being
and scrolling. And I totally get that.
So I actually put little brekes on it so I don't use it as much. But no, I do. I think there's a lot of great winery content there.
Instagram page?
I do. But I don't remember what it is.
All right, good for you. I appreciate that. All right, we got to get out of here. I want to thank our guest, Braiden Albrecht. Braiden is the winemaker at legendary historic winery, Mayacamas. Thank you to our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam BenRuby, and you have been listening to The Grape Nation. The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
I wanted to tell you about a new podcast from HRN. It's called Fed by Blue, and it explores the transformative power of water, showing how the ocean can serve as a sanctuary, a source of renewal, an important source of food, and a profound tool for the fight against nutritional injustice. I'm your host, Jennifer Bushman, Executive Director of Fed by Blue, a nonprofit working to highlight the role of responsibly sourced foods from water in the shaping of the future of our world's foods, and the executive producer of Impact for the James Beard and Emmy-nominated PBS docuseries Hope in the Water. In the show, I'll be sharing behind-the-scenes stories, personal reflections, and interviews with incredible people who bring this work to life. We'll also dive into the science, the psychology, and the magic of the water itself, and how it's playing an urgently needed role in the future of food, one wave at a time. Whether you're a longtime ocean lover or simply just curious about the life-changing potential of nature's most powerful source, this podcast is for you. So join me as we explore the stories of resilience, courage, and transformation, and discover just how much hope can be found in the water. Find Fed by Blue wherever you get your podcasts.